Welcome to episode number 57 of Birth Words. In today's episode, we'll be thinking critically about the conversations that we have with caregivers and their impact.
Welcome to Birth Words. Words are powerful. What are you doing with yours? In this podcast, birth doula and applied linguistics scholar Sara invites you to be intentional, reflective, and empowering with your language as we come together to honor those who give birth. The work of Birth Words is to elevate the language surrounding pregnancy, birth, and the postpartum period. Nothing in this podcast should be taken as medical advice.
Welcome, and thank you so much for joining me today for this episode. As we get started today, I wanted to draw your attention to some of the things that I've been working on in the Birth Words realm recently. I want you to know about all the products that are out there, all the opportunities to engage in this kind of thought and heart work of thinking about our words and their effects during pregnancy, birth, and postpartum. So I want to make sure you know what's going on out there. What are the resources that you can tap into? So the one I've been putting a lot of effort into, I have a goal. It's looking like August 31st will be most likely the release date for the online in-depth class for birth workers. And in this class, it's a series of videos and an interactive workbook that guides you through a lot of exercises if you're a birth worker to think from preconception to postpartum about the language that you use and how you can be more reflective, intentional, and empowering with your words. So it's available for pre-order now at birthwords.com/classes. Or you can wait until August 31st and sign up and we can make that happen for you. If you're in Utah, I would love for you to join me on September 26th. That's a Saturday in Leahy, in between Salt Lake County and Utah County. We're going to have a full day from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. with a break for lunch, talking and interacting and discussing and learning and watching and reflecting about language. It's very similar to the class that's coming out this month for all birth professionals online, but a lot more interactive since we'll be there in person. We'll play some fun games, we'll laugh, we'll cry, we'll think, and we'll ponder and make commitments to use our words to better serve our clients from preconception through postpartum. And both of these classes are really open to whatever birth professionals are interested in taking them. So that could mean care providers, midwives, doctors, nurses, doulas, lactation consultants, mental health professionals who specialize in postpartum care or pregnancy care, chiropractors, childbirth educators, anyone who really has a heart for working with new parents. I would invite you to check out these classes. And what else is going on? I made an announcement in this month's newsletter that came out on August 1st that also I have in the works a book for birthing families, for expectant parents, that again walks you through from preconception to postpartum and thinking about the language that you use and how you can really use that as a tool that will make you have a better, more empowering pregnancy, birth, and postpartum experience. So stay tuned. It'll be a few months, and I have not yet announced a release date for that book, but it is coming, so get excited. And if you aren't signed up for the newsletter where you can learn about these things each month, please go ahead and go to birthwords.com, and anywhere you see it says join the linguistic revolution, sign up there and you'll get the monthly newsletter. There's also a chance for you anytime you're visiting birthwords.com to sign up to receive a new PDF that I created in the last month. called 6 Questions for a Better Birth. And this is applicable to birthing families and to birth professionals. And it just guides you through 6 different questions to ask yourself to prepare to have the best birth that you can. So that is a free PDF download that's available. Just visit birthwords.com and give me your email address. I can send that to you. And then you'll be updated and in the loop as long as you want to be about other goings on in the birthwords world. Other things that are going on. There is always an opportunity for birthing families, if you're interested, to sign up for a virtual consultation where we can talk specifically about your situation as you prepare for birth, as you go through pregnancy, or as you're in the postpartum period, to have a conversation with me about what we can do, how we can make that as meaningful and powerful as possible for you, using and leveraging the tools of your language and your words. So that's always going on. There's also always a 1-hour webinar for birth professionals that was recorded for the Evidence-Based Birth virtual event following their in-person conference. And that's available for download at birthwords.com. You can click on shop, or it's on the classes tab. Also on the shop tab, there are always affirmation cards, beautifully designed, and an option for custom affirmations that you can request, and I'll design and send them to you. So that is just a run through of many of the resources that are available. Of course, there's also this podcast now coming out every other week, and I invite you to follow me on Instagram and Facebook, where there's more regular content, and join the Birthwords community on Facebook. That's a community where I would love to see you, my followers, my listeners, starting conversations saying, hey, I thought about this and I wondered, what are your thoughts? Or I saw this funny comic and I thought this group would appreciate it. Whatever is going on there. I don't need to be the one starting those conversations, although I often will. But I invite you to share your thoughts there with other people who are thinking critically about language and birth. So please keep with me on this journey. I thank you so much for all that all of you have done throughout this first year and a little bit of Birthwords, and look forward to being with you as more and more comes forward. So today for this episode, I am looking at an article that was written several years ago, back in 2004, and it has nothing to do with birth. So why on earth is it relevant? That's a good question. So this article is called Therapy Talk, Analyzing Therapeutic Discourse. It was written by Margaret M. Leahy, a professor at Trinity College in Dublin, Ireland, and she teaches in the speech language pathology department, or did previously, and I'm not sure if she still is, but she writes this article in the journal American Speech Language Hearing Association, and the article is written from the perspective of a speech language pathologist to other speech language pathologists, other practitioners in that field. And she says, hey, all of you, my colleagues, let's take a minute and think critically about the language that we use when we converse with our clients, when we're talking with them and inviting them to make these changes that will establish the speech habits they're trying to establish. Let's look closely at the way that these conversations are framed and think critically about if there are some things that we should be doing differently. So she takes some specific examples of a transcript between a speech language pathologist and a client, and she argues that the speech there sets up a rigidly asymmetrical relationship. And she says, wow, look at how we set up this asymmetrical power relationship where the speech language pathologist is in this position of authority and the client that they're trying really to empower through this procedure is kind of stuck in this lower position of authority, and the language that the pathologist is using is kind of reinforcing that power differential. And Leahy says, let's think for a bit about how this might be really problematic for those that we are serving for our clients. And she points out several things. So she looks at footing, which is the understanding of thinking about how you're aligned to another person, the stance that you're taking when you interact. So there are lots of different types of footing, but we could be a conversation between friends, we could be a conversation between parent and child, we could be between partners, between a boss and an employee. And you can hear that in some of these relationships, there is an authority or power difference between one position and the other. And in some, they're fairly equal. There are lots and lots of these sorts of different footings. Equal but distant, equal and intimate but hierarchical, on and on. So Leahy says, okay, let's look at the footing that's going on in this conversation between this client and the speech pathologist. And Leahy asserts that this is really set up as a patient-doctor kind of relationship in which the speech markers that the clinician uses are continually asserting that the clinician has greater power than the patient or the client, who, again, is supposed to be being empowered through this conversation to gain new skills and form new speech habits and be empowered in their speech. And she notices things like the way that the clinician uses the word okay or well is signaling kind of compliance from the client, whether without the client's opportunity to signal whether they want to engage in that relationship. And in this article, Leahy goes on to look specifically at this conversation between the speech pathologist and the client to look at what are those different cues that are showing and instilling and reinforcing this power differential between the clinician and the patient as it's framed or as the footing is. And how can we be more sensitive to our linguistic framing, how we frame those interactions with those that we're working to serve so that we are recognizing them and their power and their autonomy. Okay, so that was a lot about speech-language pathology, which is not anything to do with birth. But of course, when I read this, I was like, oh, wow, I see so much the application of so many times those that are serving pregnant families, birth givers, doing this sort of thing where we have this linguistic framing that's saying, I'm in a position of authority and you're in a lower position of authority. And what sort of weird situations does that lead us to? And what sorts of power differentials does it affirm and perpetuate? And how can we break them down and have a linguistic revolution, right? That's why we're here in Birthwords. So to make this more concrete, I'm going to play for you a clip from a YouTube video. And again, I chose this as I feel like it's representative of many conversations that may occur between a doctor and a pregnant parent. I don't know this doctor personally, and it doesn't come across as intentionally demeaning or patronizing. But I want us to pause and critically think about what is going on with this linguistic framing that actually is reinforcing some maybe subliminal messages about who has power in this situation and who the authority figure is, like, ultimately and maybe overwhelmingly. So I'm going to play a clip for you from that. And again, it's a YouTube video. I will put the link in the show notes so you can absolutely go watch it on your own. We're obviously missing out on the visual as you listen to it, but I will catch you up on it afterwards and fill in the blanks. So here we go.
Okay, so today I'm going to be going over the first trimester, basically, including and specifically the first prenatal visit. Okay, so like we went over a little bit before, pregnancy is 40 weeks from last menstrual period. So last menstrual period being here, okay? At about 4 weeks is when you get the missed period and positive pregnancy test. okay? A lot of people ask when to come in for the first prenatal visit. There's two real possibilities. Coming in earlier than 6 weeks, unless there's something specific to be concerned about, doesn't make a lot of sense because you're not going to see anything on ultrasound until probably about 5 to 6 weeks. I oftentimes will see people at 6 weeks for what I call a confirmation of pregnancy. So do an ultrasound to make sure that the pregnancy is measuring at the correct size for what's expected. 8 weeks is normally what we consider the first prenatal visit or the initial prenatal visit.
So I'm going to stop it right there because she keeps going, and a lot of the things that we're going to talk about have already been established in that first minute or so that you listened to. So in this video, you heard at the beginning there was just a little bit of music the first couple of seconds. And it's really interesting because as that music plays, if you're able to see the visual, you watch this OB putting on some medical gloves, and then in the first few seconds as the video begins, you see all these clinical aspects of the setting that positions the OB as an authority figure and the client, who's not actually present in this video, as a passive subordinate patient. And you notice that the birth giver is met with the same paraphernalia, the same gloves and white coat and clinician's office, as if she was hurt or ill or had a disease, rather than being treated as if we're growing a healthy new life, right? So we have all these kind of signs and symbols that say that we're treating someone who's unwell, when really we're treating somebody who's rather healthy and growing an entire new person who hopefully is also rather healthy. But there's kind of a mismatch in those cues. So the video shows the obstetrician with a clipboard, putting on medical gloves, wearing a medical white coat, and then as the video progresses, the OB uses a whiteboard and is writing out the timeline that she's talking about as the weeks of pregnancy progress. And she's using a whiteboard marker and circling different things and tapping on the whiteboard as she speaks, really positioning herself as an expert lecturer and the client as a passive student who's not super involved in this thing that's happening to her body, but is being informed by the supposed powerful expert in what's going on with her. And this is especially interesting because it's happening right, they're talking about what to expect at the first prenatal visit. So we're seeing this sort of behavior a lot of times in this sort of setting from the very get-go. From the very first time a client meets with their doctor, they're seeing this and treated in this manner. And again, I'm not tearing apart people who do these things. I'm just trying to point out the system into which we've adopted birth and pregnancy is a system that's set up for treating those who are ill. And so that creates some difficult problems. And some other complications along the way, but that's what we'll get into for now. So I've noticed throughout the video that the OB uses the verbal marker okay. She uses it at the very start of the video. She uses it throughout, saying okay, and Leahy in the article with the speech therapist talked about how this specific marker can be used to establish her role as an authority figure who's explaining to the less powerful client what to expect. And she says, today I'm going to be going over blah, blah, blah. Again, positioning herself as the more powerful expert figure offering explanation to the less powerful client. And continues to use this okay, again, repeatedly indicating her authority. Then throughout the video, the OB also uses the inclusive we. So you heard during the clip that I played you, she says, like we went over a little bit before. Leahy points out in her article about speech pathology that this verbal marker of the inclusive we, when somebody is really saying, like I went over before, but it says we, is indicating authority by subsuming responsibility for talk for both the teacher and the patient. And again, there's no air quotes, patient, even in this video, but the doctor is using this inclusive we as if to speak for the both of them. She also uses we to refer to obstetricians generally, and uses this as another claim to authority. She's citing the experts group work and opinions, like she said in the clip that you heard. 8 weeks is what we normally consider the first prenatal visit. Later she says, like every visit in medicine, we do a history and a physical exam. So we see that she uses we. Look what I'm doing. You can go back and analyze my talk and in this episode later if you're bored. But I noticed that she continues to use this we marker throughout to position her own authority and to refer to others in a similar position of authority and thus strengthen her own. What really hits me with this video, I'm not going to keep going into these sorts of details because I like to keep the episode short and our time is about up. And we don't need to just keep whacking the same nail with a hammer over and over again. But when I read Leahy's article about speech pathology, she said this, quote, "It is reasonable to question whether an asymmetrical relationship is the most conducive means of facilitating change." So Leahy, a speech pathologist, is saying to her speech pathologist colleagues, look, we really want our clients to change and improve, and I think it's worth pausing and asking ourselves whether the asymmetrical power relationships we set up and instill and perpetuate through our linguistic framing is really the best way to invite our clients to make the kind of change that we're interested in them making. So similarly, I would argue that it is reasonable to question, using Leahy's words, it is reasonable to question whether an asymmetrical relationship, this time between care provider and expectant parent, is the most conducive means of facilitating a healthy pregnancy, positive birth experience, and confidence in early parenting. Thank you for joining me on this episode today. I hope that it has given you some tools to open your eyes and ears to the conversations around us and think about where there are opportunities to invite more autonomy on the parts of expectant parents. If that's you, invite yourself into those spaces. Recognize that you have authority as the one growing this child. And yes, turn to those who have expert advice and value their opinions, but don't let it subsume your authority and your autonomy as the one giving birth to, growing, giving birth to, and then parenting this child. Many parents are faced with a difficult situation when they're handed a new baby and realize that for the first time, they're treated as if they have authority in this situation, and seem rather perplexed with what to do and how to move forward in that situation. So I invite you to recognize your own autonomy and authority, the one growing this life and bringing it into the world from the beginning of your pregnancy and on. Choose carefully those that are in your circle of support that you look to for their advice and their expertise and their experience, and look for those who value and honor the work that you are doing.
If you're interested in sharing your ideas or experiences on the podcast, go to birthwords.com. If you're liking what you hear, please leave a review on your podcast app. For more resources about language for a better birth, subscribe to the monthly newsletter at birthwords.com and follow Birthwords on Instagram and Facebook.